I just want to say thank you to Jim for that very kind introduction, and I just want to say thank you to all of you for being here and for being a part of such an important topic that all of us as family members and friends need to know about to enrich our relationships and our own personal lives. UCAP is near and dear to my heart, and every year that we grow a little bit, it just makes me so happy. So seeing each of you here today is truly a gift to me, so thank you for being here. My topic today is, it's about starting a recovery journey. And for those of you who are here and interested in what this means for you in your own recovery journey, I know that you'll find something from what I shared today that will be helpful to you. For those of you who are here to guide and support and assist those who are in the recovery journey, I also know that what we're going to talk about today is going to help you in your journey as well. I like to be a little bit interactive, so if you have questions, please raise your hand, and these lights are a little bit blinding, so you may have to kind of be a little bit more animated when you have a question so that I can see you. Feel free to ask questions all along the way today. I want this to be useful for each one of you. I'll be handling a few basic questions about disclosure at the end. That you can wait for that if you want to as well. As I have prepared for this presentation today, I have constantly reflected about an experience that I had with my son in July of last year. When each one of my kids turned 12 years old, I have 4 kids, and when each one turns 12, we kind of take them on a little 12-year-old trip, and we let them choose where they want to go, and we just do special things with them to kind of, hopefully develop some type of foundation that they can remember that we love them and they love us before they turn into teenagers. And so anyway, my son, he turned 12 last year, and he chose to go to Fort Lauderdale, Florida. How many of you have been there? It's wonderful. The water is amazing. And so one Thursday night, the sun had just gone down, and we saw this buoy that was off in the distance in the water. And I told my son, I said, "Spencer, we're going to swim to that buoy." And he said, "Dad, that's way too far out there, and the water's too deep." And so I'm a therapist, and I feel bad for my kids sometimes because I'm always doing like mini therapy sessions with them. And how many of you have had a therapist parent and know what I'm talking about? Okay. Anyway, so I wanted to teach him that just because the water is much deeper, if you can swim, it doesn't matter. You can swim in 5 feet of water the same as you can swim in 500 feet of water. But that was a tough thought for him. But so we went out and we swam to this buoy. It took like an hour to get out there and back, but we were able to make it. And my son felt great about himself, and he was so excited. I felt really good too. I kind of had a parent victory moment, And he liked it so much that the next night, Friday night, we decided to do it again. Only this time, we got a little bit later start. The sun had gone down, and we decided to take our snorkel and fins and to kind of make up for the time that we'd lost because the sun was going down. And so if you've snorkeled or scuba dived before, you know that you don't put your fins on the beach. You put them on at about chest deep water. And so I was at about chest deep water, just getting ready to put my fins on. And all of a sudden, I heard screaming. And I was like, oh, it's Friday night. There's probably just a bunch of people having fun on the beach. So I dismissed it. And then a few moments later, I could tell that the screaming was growing louder, and it was getting stronger. And in the corner of my eye, my back was to the beach, in the corner of my eye, I could see a large group of people running towards me. And guess what they were screaming? Shark. And I was in the water, in chest-deep water. And my first thought was, I am in the shark's territory. You know, like this is their turf, not mine. Whatever's gonna happen is gonna happen. And my second thought was, where's my son? Thankfully, he must have heard them before I did. And he was already on the beach. And so I just calmly turned around and just walked back to the beach. And as soon as I got to the sand, I turned back around, and that picture that you're looking at right there is very similar to the picture that I saw right where I was. And I was about to be shark bait. And I thought about that experience because as I was preparing for our meeting today. And I thought about it because when a person's starting the recovery journey, I want to be kind of like that person on the beach that shares a few things with them. And I want to share those things with you today about starting a recovery journey. It's in my experience, I've worked with couples and individuals that struggle with this addiction for over 14 years. And the things that I am going to share with you today are vitally important. And in my mind, even as important as those people's message to me when I was in the water and a shark was like, you know, hunting me. And so one of the things that I want to share with you is, number one, when you pick up a stick, you pick up both ends. Why do I say that? When an individual who has struggled with this addiction begins this journey of healing, we have to understand a few truths about this journey, and I want to share with you. Number one, secrets are love repellent. You will feel loved to the degree that you have no secrets. For those of you who listened to my speech last year, if you didn't, I encourage you to go back and listen to it. It's about the sex addiction cycle. And in that cycle, what we've learned is that there's all kinds of different stresses that we experience as humans. And one of the stresses that is the most common factor in activating the sex addiction cycle that a person relapses or slips with is relational pain, because they aren't feeling loved by the people around them. And not only that, because of some of the things that are happening in their brain, they think it's everybody else's fault. And so if you can imagine how much destruction that can cause in a marriage. But one of the truths are, you will feel loved to the degree that you have no secrets. And we have to also understand and honor that many of these individuals who have struggled with this addiction have become very good at creating walls in their life. And we have to honor that and respect that. We don't like it, but we have to honor it and respect it, because if we don't, we cannot help them kind of deconstruct that wall. So another truth is, you will get better to the degree that you don't have secrets. And the other thing I want you to know is that a formal disclosure is different than a confession that you may give to a church leader, and it's different than a personal inventory that you give in a 12-step program. How many of you knew that there was a difference between those three things? Okay, good. So a lot of you did not raise your hand, so let me kind of go over some fundamental differences. With a full and formal disclosure, it involves the relationship. Obviously, the individual struggling with addiction is going to be disclosing their acting out behaviors, how long they've been going on, and so forth. However, there are things that their family member, parent or guardian, or their spouse are going to be disclosing as well. I'll be kind of sharing a little bit about that later on in the presentation, but it engages the relationship, and the purpose of disclosures is to remove barriers, which are the secrets, that are preventing that couple from healing and for preventing them from being close as well. So the other thing that you have to remember is you can only connect to the degree that you don't have secrets. So one of the things that I want all of you to remember from this is you cannot get better when you have secrets. And I have seen many, many individuals try, and they're still doing it their way. When you're having secrets, you're still doing it your way, and it doesn't work. You have to use the tools that build healing, that build relationships, and those tools include vulnerability and openness and accountability. So a moment ago I said that we have to kind of honor and respect that when an individual has been kind of trapped in this addiction for years or even decades, we have to respect that they have become very good at building walls. We don't like the fact that they've built those walls, but they're there. And those walls have gone up one brick at a time. And they've gone up for various reasons. They've gone up at times when, they've been discovered and they have to do damage control so that they're not fully exposed. They are going up because they're afraid that if someone knew the full story, they would be fully rejected. And that fear of rejection is very, very powerful. And so the toxic shame that these individuals feel is very intense. And my experience in working with many, many couples and doing a full formal disclosure is it takes 2 to 4 months working week after week, understanding how to remove this wall. And that's one of the things we have to do. That wall, it went up one brick at a time, and it has to come down in many ways, one brick at a time. Secrets are obviously extremely damaging to relationships. And if any individual is out there and they're trying to do their recovery process, but they haven't done disclosure, they may experience something like this with their spouse. Their spouse may say something to them like, "Hey, I love you," or "I'm so grateful for you," or something like that. But inside, that individual who struggles with this addiction is kind of thinking and feeling, "You don't love me, because if you knew what I was really doing, or if you've known what I just did last night, you wouldn't say that." And so in that moment that they have that feeling, they are basically rejecting their spouse's love. And what form of pain is that of the 5 forms of pain that start this addiction? It's relational pain, which is, again, the most potent type of pain and stress that activates the addiction cycle. And when an individual experiences that, they experience toxic shame to a strong degree. And what they get involved in doing at that point is a process that I call the switcheroo. Other people have called it gaslighting or turning the tables or something. But basically what the pattern is, and this pattern is pretty much in every single couple that I have worked with, they don't feel their spouse's love and they blame the spouse. And that causes tremendous pain because the spouse is often like just racking her brain What can I do to like make my marriage better constantly? And so in order to kind of help individuals, they have to start identifying, okay, what's one brick at a time type of philosophy that I can start doing today to work towards being able to be ready for a full disclosure. So one of those things is understanding about what spotlighting is. Individuals who struggle with this addiction are very akin to a director of a play. A director of a play uses this spotlight for various reasons. One of the reasons that they use these spotlights is to control what the audience is looking at. And they do this most often when they're unable to close the curtains and they have to do scenery changes or prop changes or cast changes in the background, and they basically turn off the stage lights and they only use the spotlight, and they can focus and everybody's eyes are naturally guided to the light. And so individuals that struggle with this addiction throughout their life are expert at spotlighting. And this comes at times when they are, maybe they're in recovery and they haven't done a formal disclosure yet, and they may have had a slip. And one of the things that these individuals do is they get vague. They become very vague about what actually happened with this slip. So for instance, an individual will say, well, I had a slip with pornography. You may say that that's pretty blunt, but as a therapist, I'm thinking that's pretty vague. Because I'm wanting to know, okay, so tell me more about that. One of the first things that I'll ask, with that one in particular, is how long did you view pornography? And I'm not asking that question because I'm looking for, if it was more than this many minutes or hours, then this person's dealing with a more severe addiction. That's not why I ask the question. The reason I ask the question is because without exception, most of these individuals who have viewed pornography, they have this invisible line in their head, and they think, well, I looked at it for an hour, and I can't tell anybody that I looked at pornography for an hour, because if I do, they'll think that I'm a pervert, because people who look at porn for an hour are perverts. And so they leave that part out. And so I'm asking them, hey, how long did you view pornography? And most of the time they pause and they start, you can kind of see in their eyes, and they're just kind of trying to come up with an answer that they think I want to hear, or that they can kind of maintain their, self-respect in themselves. And I always ask them, I say, what's going on inside your body right now as you think about the answer to that question? And it's most often pain. They're hurting. They're already feeling that relational pain, even with me as a therapist. And it's hard for them to step out into the light and say, look, I viewed pornography for about 2 or 3 hours last night. And I'll say 2 or 3, because I'm inviting them into the light. Not because not because there's a difference between 2 minutes or 2 hours, but because a person cannot heal if they are in the darkness. And if they aren't unearthing those worries and concerns that because they viewed this long, they're not going to heal. And so they have to be willing to stop spotlighting, and they have to be willing to turn all the lights on. And if they want to get better, and I know there are those out there in the sound of my voice that are fighting this battle right now, and I'm talking to you. If you want to get better, you have to accept that truth, that you will only get better to the degree that you're stepping into the light about this. And that has like 10% to do with what the actual behavior is, and 90% about exposing what's going on inside of you or what you believe about yourself because of this problem in your life. That's what those boxes that you see on that stage are filled with. Maybe one of those smaller boxes are filled with the actual factual details about the acting out behavior. The rest of those boxes are full of those fears and concerns about themselves. So the other thing that they have to accept and learn to work with is that if they're married, that their spouse will also only heal to the degree that they come forward with secrets. So this is where I want to talk for a moment about what the spouse's role in recovery looks like. Every woman that I've worked with who's married to an individual that struggles with this addiction has tons of memories where they felt like something was wrong, that there was something going on in the marriage. They didn't suspect pornography perhaps, but they just felt like there was this kind of subtle disconnection or something wasn't right. And so they act on that feeling, thankfully, and they kind of come forward with a simple question about, hey, is everything okay? And because this individual is in hiding, and maybe they're even in recovery still, and they just, in their mind, they don't want to cause pain by being real, they will respond with this kind of, hey, everything's great. But what's really happening, and this is what an addict has to accept, and their wife already knows, is that they're kind of sending double messages. With their mouth, they're saying, everything's great, but behind them, behind that wall, is that secret. And that secret is having devastating effects in that woman's life because she's constantly getting double messages. That is the key factor of defining relational trauma, or what some people call betrayal trauma, is constantly receiving double messages from someone in your life, your spouse, who should only be giving you one message, a genuine, authentic message every day. And when an individual, a woman or a man, in this case a woman, when a woman struggles with this daily onslaught of double messages, it does create strong trauma in that woman's life. And she is carrying around large quantities of unanswered questions. This is where the wife's role in the recovery and disclosure process begins to kind of make sense. So when I'm sitting with a woman who is working on disclosure with her husband, I will start asking her questions like, can you tell me about a time in your marriage where you felt like something was going on, or maybe you even caught your husband looking at pornography and he downplayed it, he was doing damage control, and he didn't come forward with everything. Can you tell me what that was like for you? And most often it's filled with a lot of pain, a lot of doubt in themselves. Many women are blaming themselves for that because their husband isn't giving them anything tangible to explain why it's there, so they naturally blame themselves. And so I start getting more context about that specific memory that they have, and I say, do you think, now that you know that your husband's been struggling with this addiction, I think it's time that you start asking questions about those earlier events in your marriage so that you can finally put those events to rest. And so what she begins to do is start making a list of questions. And I have had women make anywhere from 300 to 400 questions about those type of things, and some women that don't do a whole lot, like 40 to 50. But either way, again, remember the disclosure is not only for the addict who is being accountable, disclosing their secrets. What also has to be brought to light are the memories and the trauma that the women have been experiencing so that they can resolve those. And that opens the door for the husband to start learning and practicing accountability in the marriage. And without those opportunities to develop that, long-term sobriety begins, it's very hard to maintain that. And so in recovery, when you're doing disclosure, it's a very engaged process by both husband and wife. And that's one of the main differences between a confession and a personal inventory in 12-step. An inventory is more individual in nature. And it's more primarily going to be used to share with that group and other people too, but primarily the group. It's primarily for the benefit of the individual. And for years and years, people would be doing disclosures, therapists would be doing disclosures with couples as if they were inventories. And so it was a brutal experience for women. And how many of you know a woman who received like all the details from their husband with no support or education or anything? How many of you have had that experience? It's difficult, isn't it? It's useful, but not usually for them. It's useful because they get to know the facts and so forth, and that's part of the healing that needs to take place. It's important. I don't want to downplay that. That's critical. However, that's an inventory for an individual. Disclosure is about couples and family members. I do this with adolescents that I'm working with their parents for the same reasons. And so it's an opportunity. Oh, did you have a question?
I do. You're talking about disclosure, but what if, the addicted party has to be committed in order for the disclosure to work, and you said what the other side is supposed to be doing, but it just feels so frustrating if all you get are the I'm great, I'm great, I'm great.
Right. So her question is, if I'm understanding correctly, like if a woman is working really hard at, searching for those questions and so forth, and if the husband's not doing his part, is that what you're worried about? Okay. So first of all, this is all within the framework of two individuals that are working with a therapist, and a therapist who is trained in not only addiction but also shame, and understands how to work with that individual to kind of help them take the layers off. And remember, this process takes 2 to 4 months. Historically, therapists and groups have tried to do like a disclosure, right? Well, okay, we're going to have a session that we're just going to go to the office and you're going to tell us everything. And I'm like, my mind is going totally boggled because I've worked with individuals that struggle with this addiction for 14 years, and there's hardly any that I can think of that would be able to do that in a healthy way and be able to put everything on the table. It takes me 2 to 4 months, and sometimes even longer than that, to help them really understand how and what's going on inside of them to be able to do that. And so a lot of times I have women that are afraid that like, well, what if my husband doesn't give a full disclosure? And so I tell them, even if that's the case, he is still giving a full disclosure. He's disclosing to you that he's not willing to get well. He's disclosing to you that he's not willing to work recovery. And that means that that spouse has to make some difficult choices about how long she can wait for him to get into recovery in a full and complete way. And some do wait, and some women don't feel like they can be in a marriage where the spouse isn't in full recovery. And so they have to set some boundaries. And some really good writing about that type of situation can be found in Real Crowshaw's book, What Do I Do About Me? And it has the him crossed out. And one part of that book that I especially love is at the end there's an appendix. And in that appendix it has this kind of graph and guide to kind of like show, like, this is what it looks like if your husband is in addiction or if he's in recovery. And then it also has one for the women. This is what it looks like if you're in your recovery or if you're being paralyzed by your trauma still. And so even, and I've been in situations where a woman, for instance, one time she said, you know what, if you don't give me a full and complete disclosure, then that's a deal breaker for me. And the husband, he said, well, I'm not going to do a full and complete disclosure. And he just wasn't willing to do it. And she thankfully was able to keep her boundary and sad, but she ended the marriage. But it would have been much sadder if she would have kind of, continued to live under those traumatic circumstances. So does that answer your question? Other questions about that? Yes. Okay, so her question is, what should be involved in the disclosure? So can I ask you a question? Are you talking from the wife's perspective or the husband? And I'm asking that question because I'm totally being a therapist right now to all of you. And I'm wanting you to think of disclosure in both perspectives now. So, okay, now that I'm done being a therapist, I'll answer your question. So what should be in a disclosure? So a lot of people think that a disclosure is like a play-by-play of all their sexual acting out behaviors, and that's wrong. A disclosure, I like to call it a floor and a ceiling. So you go through each one of the sexual acting out behaviors. It's not, okay, there we go. I don't even remember what I was saying. What was that? Oh yeah, okay, thank you. Technical difficulties. Well, I guess that's technical, right? Okay, so again, it's not necessary to do a play-by-play. But when I'm working with an individual, so for instance, we'll go behavior by behavior, and we'll ask questions like, what was the most amount of time or what was the highest amount of frequency that you engaged in that behavior? And what was the average, and what was the longest time you've gone without that? So for instance, considering if the acting out behavior is pornography, that individual will say, the longest I ever looked at pornography was 5 hours. And the average amount was 30 minutes. And the longest I've gone without it is a year or whatever it is. And so the reason I'm doing that is because I'm wanting to capture not only the behavior, but I'm also wanting to capture that person and the shame that they're feeling because of that. Because a lot of people think that disclosure is about disclosing the behavior, and it is. That's where accountability comes into play. But recovery comes into play when that person is disclosing the shame. For instance, I feel like I'm a pervert because I spent 9 hours looking at pornography and my wife was in the room next to me. Or I was looking at pornography all day and I let my kids watch Netflix. And the shame so there's accountability about the behavior, and there's recovery because they're healing from the shame. And so they go through each one of their acting out behaviors, and every single addict has a different set of behaviors. And I also include, even if you did that behavior once, you need to report about that. And here's why. Maybe it was acting out behavior that happened in their childhood. And they're like, Jeff, why do I have to say that? My experience tells me that the shame is most deep-seated about the things that only happened once or twice or a handful of times. Younger in life, most of the time. Sometimes it can be more current, but it's usually earlier on in life. And so disclosures about engaging accountability and recovery. And so I'm wanting to ask about the behaviors so that they can be accountable to their spouse or their parent. And I'm also wanting to engage them in this calling, basically, to step into the light. Stop hiding in the darkness. You've been trying to get better in secrecy for a long time. You've tried to do this your way, and has it ever worked? No, it hasn't. How many of us have talked to individuals that struggle with this addiction that, they're experts at stopping, but they can't leave it alone? One of the reasons is because they're only being accountable for those behaviors. They're not getting in and doing their shame work. John Bradshaw, who's a fundamental researcher in shame and addiction, always taught that without healing from shame, there will always be addiction. And it's true. Brene Brown has done a lot of work on that, more contemporary, and she has found the same thing in her research. So does that answer your question? Okay, another question here.
Why is there shame? What causes the shame?
Okay, so the question was, why is there shame? Oh my goodness, okay. So the answer to that question is simple. Addicts are experts at making these invisible lines in their mind. They have these invisible lines that if they aren't looking for more than 30 minutes, then they really don't have a problem. Or if they only look this many times per year, then they don't really have a problem. And the truth is they do, and they've broken those lines, and they feel horrible. And when a person is in shame, they are in the dark, they're not healing, and they're not connected to other people around them. The thing that heals people is being connected and reaching out when you are in need of help. And without that, without support from others, they won't get better. I mean, any individual who struggled with this addiction for years will tell you that the moment that things started to change is when they started opening up. They've tried it on their own to stop for a long time, and it doesn't work. Okay, a follow-up. Yes?
What about those with shamelessness?
So some individuals that have not enough shame. Okay, so again, that's still an opportunity to learn healthy accountability and learning to sit with their spouse's feelings. And usually that's around, that occurs because a person hasn't had, a parent feel empathy for them as a child. So okay, one more question, then I'm going to go into some other questions. Yes, in the back, nice and loud. Yeah. Can you come forward? I thought I could hear you, but I give a little jog so we can use our time. Yes.
How often do you find out that two people go through the disclosure process and they're willing to do it and then the marriage ends?
Okay, so my experience so his question, for those of you who couldn't hear it, was how often do marriages end as a result of disclosure? And the answer is about 20%. Research has found that 70 to 80% of couples who go through the formal disclosure process are stronger and closer because of it. There are certain times when the marriages end. And my experience has been a little bit different. My experience has been more like 5 to 10% of couples have ended their marriage as a result of disclosure. So that's the answer to that question. Other questions? Okay. Oh, yes, right here.
So just that question about shame. Like shame comes from an emotion that wasn't expressed.
Right. So your question is it about shame and about emotions not being expressed?
It's not really a question, it's more like a statement. She just was asking about shame. Shame comes from an emotion that was never able to be expressed.
Right. And I love how you're saying that, because what she's saying is shame comes from not being able to, like, in a healthy way, connect with someone or express what you're feeling about an experience with someone. And what happens, especially those early childhood experiences, there's a lot of shame, and they don't say anything to anybody, and it incubates. And it becomes very, very old inside of them and very hardened. And it's essential to kind of do the hard work of chipping through that, so to speak. Okay, I'm going to have to skip forward here to some common questions that I get from parents. Oh, where are they? Some common questions that I get from parents is, how much do I tell my kids? And this one's really important. So I can't give every single one of you an individual answer, but I can give you guidelines. Obviously, if you're engaged in recovery and you're going to meetings, maybe your spouse is going to meetings as well, your family is going to notice that you're gone each week at the same time, and they're going to need some type of an explanation. And again, I can't give you everybody an exact answer, but here's some of the guidelines. So when you're thinking about, as a couple, what you're telling your kids, because they need to know something's going on, you need to consider their maturity. And their maturity comes in a couple different ways. Number one, has this child demonstrated a consistent ability to keep things private or confidential? You obviously are going to be less inclined to tell a child who, is taking family private issues and telling their friends, or maybe they're in a moment of anger. When you won't let them go to the movie with their friends, they kind of throw that out there. So if they're not able to kind of understand those healthy boundaries, it's not a good idea to tell that child. And every single child is different developmentally. Some will be better even though they're younger, and some won't be as good at that even if they're older. Another thing that you need to keep in consideration with their maturity is, does this child have the resources and the ability to process this information? One of the most common times I hear this is when a father is struggling with his addiction and he's in recovery and doing well, and all of a sudden they discover that their child is struggling as well, and they think that, oh, I'll just tell my child my story, and then we can be buddies and we can be in recovery together. And sometimes that works, but most of the time it doesn't. Sometimes it cuts access off. That relationship diminishes. And here we are giving this person that's trying to get their own feet underneath them, and we're adding to that burden. And so it can devastate some kids because maybe they never would have guessed that. And so does that child demonstrate the ability to deal with things consistently in a connected and healthy way? The other thing that I get a lot of questions about is, do I tell my parents? And typically, it depends on where that couple is in their recovery process. If they're in crisis and they tell their parents in the moment of crisis, Sometimes that can go really, really well, and sometimes it can actually create a lot of problems, and it looks like the blind leading the blind at times. And some of you have been through that, know what I'm talking about. It can be really difficult if in a moment of crisis, a spouse reaches out and says, hey, look, my husband's looking at pornography and I'm devastated, and maybe those parents start hating that husband, and they're not there for the wife anymore because she's chosen to stay with him and try to work on it. And so you have to take those type of things into consideration. What is the necessity? The biggest necessity for individuals who are starting this recovery journey are, number one, reaching out and helping each other, reaching to a church leader, reaching to a therapist or a trusted friend perhaps that has some experience. And thankfully, because so many people are coming to these conferences every year, more and more people are educated about how to support people on this journey. And so those are just a few questions that I wanted to go over as we talk about disclosure. And I think we've got, how many more minutes do we have, Jim?
We've got about 8.
8 minutes. So we've got time for more questions if other people would like. Yes. One here and then over here. Yep.
Talk about disclosure as far as couples, but what if you're dealing with a teenager or someone that's not married? Do they disclose to their parents?
Yes. Okay, so his question is, if I'm working or if someone's working with a teenager, do they need to disclose to the parents? And the answer is a big yes. And I'm glad you asked that question, because here's how it typically looks. If a male, a son, is dealing with that problem, then typically the response is, well, son, you just come talk to me as a father. You don't need to tell your mother. How many of you have kind of heard that going on? And we even kind of, tell our kid that sometimes. Like, this is a guy issue. This is really embarrassing to tell mom about. And I can't tell you how horrible that is, because you're essentially teaching that boy, who's eventually going to be married to a woman, that women can't handle this information, and you're basically teaching him to be secretive. And that's a devastating effect in marriage. And so when we're doing disclosure with an adolescent, we're engaging both the mother and the father, and opening the opportunity up for the mother and the father to ask questions about times that they were worried about their son that has been struggling with this. And again, I've worked with many women who go through the exact same thing that women whose husband is struggling with pornography. They're the mother and they're going through the same thing. They go through the same crazy-making feelings, the same trauma, and remember, disclosure is an opportunity for them to discharge that trauma in a healthy way. So, did you have a follow-up question? Again, pretty much any individual who's struggling with this addiction, whether they're young or old, their first impulse is not to share it with anyone. But that truth that I shared at the beginning of our meeting today, which is, hey, you will get better to the degree that you don't have secrets. And if you really want to get better, then you've got to allow yourself to lean into the discomfort. And there are some, exceptional circumstances where it's not appropriate to do a disclosure, but, first we deal with the general rule, and then we deal with the exceptions. But there's very small number of exceptions. So other questions? Yes, right here.
When a child comes to you, like after their first time seeing something that they just want, how can you handle it without feeling?
Beautiful question. So her question is, when a child who's never seen porn comes forward and discloses that they have looked at it, how do you handle that? And that's a whole presentation. I actually have one. It's called the 5 C's. You can go on UCAP, and I'd spend an hour and a half talking about how that is. But in a nutshell, you need to be calm. You need to be attentive to what your face looks like, because that child will definitely be attentive to what your face looks like. You definitely need to be, tell them how courageous they are. You need to kind of validate that they are doing such a good job by coming out, and they can do that anytime that they need to. Let them know that you're not mad. Let them know that, this is the right thing that they're doing, and that you're going to be there to help them consistently with it if they need it. Okay, question here. Okay, so he's, I'm not sure I understand. Before the marriage, their whole life. One of the cool things that's happening now more and more is, because education about this is becoming so much better, men and women are asking the question to their potential spouse about pornography. And again, unfortunately, there have been really bad advice given to parents, church leaders, that, hey, you know what, you've taken care of this, and you don't need to tell anybody else about what's happened before marriage. And basically, they've handed that person a ticking time bomb to take into their marriage. Because I've worked with hundreds of women who, when they find out that their husband has an addiction, and they say, why didn't you tell me when we were dating? And why did I receive an answer from God that I was supposed to marry you? Maybe, and then they start struggling with their relationship with God or something, and it's a devastating consequence. So I work with couples all the time who are dating, and they've disclosed it, and they do a full formal disclosure while they're dating before they get married, so that they can so that the addict can have the opportunity to be fully chosen, all of him, and that the wife can have the opportunity to fully choose, having all the information on the table, knowing what she's choosing and what they need to do to help each other. Good question. One more right here. I have time for one more question, Jim? One more, okay.
So most of your vernacular is women dealing with their husband.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see, I presume it's the majority and that's why you're talking that way, but are you seeing the other?
Yes, so her question is, she's like, Jeff, I noticed that you're using the example of men being the one struggling with addiction, and the female is not. And the answer is yes. More and more women are just as sexual as men. And women can turn to their body for comfort in a sexual way just as much as men can. And we had our first breakout session in this conference's history this year for women who are struggling with this addiction. I had a powerful session in there with them. And it's the same principles. If you have this addiction, you need to disclose it to the person you're dating or your spouse, whether you're male or female. These principles are universal. Okay, I think I'm out of time, right, Jim? I just want each of you to know how thankful I am again to spend some time with you. I hope this information has been helpful, and I look forward to seeing all of you again next year. Thank you.